Welcome back to another story on Whispered Tales. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, Foundations Shaken. Michael Turner leaned against the polished mahogany railing of his balcony, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows over the sprawling suburban estate in northern Atlanta. He inhaled deeply, the warm Georgia air mingling with the faint scent of freshly mown grass from the garden below. It was a quiet, almost deceptive calm, the kind of calm that comes before a storm. Michael's mind, however, was anything but peaceful. At 42, Michael had built a small empire in the textile industry, a company supplying garments to major retailers across the United States and even a few European clients. He had risen from modest beginnings, working long, grueling hours on the factory floor, to establish Turner Textiles, now employing more than 300 people. His hands, calloused and strong, bore the story of a man who had clawed his way out of poverty, relying on persistence, discipline, and an unyielding belief in his own abilities. 16 years ago, he had married Elizabeth Turner, or Beth, a woman whose charm and grace had captivated him immediately. She was 38 now, born into a family that had once enjoyed wealth and influence in Atlanta, though her parents' fortunes had dwindled by the time she met Michael. Their marriage had long been admired as a model of compatibility. Beth managed the household with effortless poise, orchestrated charitable events, and maintained the family's social standing, while Michael devoted himself to the relentless demands of business. Yet recently, subtle signs had begun to gnaw at Michael's mind. Beth's smiles had become more measured, her laughter sometimes delayed, as though filtered through a layer of distraction. She disappeared for hours with vague explanations, and occasionally, Michael noticed inexplicable luxuries appearing in the house, gifts that seemed out of place, receipts that did not match any known transactions. Michael's analytical mind noted these anomalies, each small inconsistency a thread in a tapestry he did not yet fully understand. Ethan Turner, their 15-year-old son, was Michael's pride and joy. Intelligent, curious, and disciplined, Ethan inherited his father's work ethic and his mother's keen intellect. The boy excelled in school and on the soccer field, often joining Michael in the garage on weekends to tinker with engines and restore old motorcycles, a ritual Beth had never fully embraced. The latest surprise in their lives, however, was Beth's unexpected pregnancy. Following a history of miscarriages, the news brought Michael both relief and concern. But alongside his joy, a quiet unease settled in his chest. Beth's demeanor had grown increasingly distant, a faint tension threading through her interactions with him. The warmth he once knew in her eyes seemed clouded, as though a secret lingered just beyond his reach. Michael had scheduled the ultrasound at Northside Women's Hospital with Dr. Samuel Harding, the family physician who had overseen Ethan's birth and had become a trusted friend over the years. As Michael waited in the sterile, sunlit waiting room, he noted the familiar hum of fluorescent lights and the soft murmur of nurses passing by. Yet, today, the ordinary details felt different, tinged with an almost imperceptible edge of foreboding. His intuition, a finely honed sense cultivated through years of negotiation and business strategy, whispered that nothing in his life would remain the same after this appointment. Daniel Hayes, Michael's longtime friend and the company's CFO, had also sensed a change in Beth. He had casually mentioned seeing her in a downtown cafe one morning, conversing with a man unfamiliar to him, their body language intimate enough to spark concern. Michael had initially brushed it off, unwilling to entertain the notion, yet the seed of doubt had been planted. Every unexplained absence, every furtive glance, every small anomaly became a piece of a puzzle that Michael was increasingly certain he needed to solve. Now, sitting in the waiting room with its muted colors and the faint antiseptic tang lingering in the air, Michael's hands rested on his knees, tight with tension. He thought of Ethan, of the fragile new life growing inside Beth, and of the home he had spent decades building. All of it seemed precariously balanced on a knife's edge. Michael closed his eyes for a brief moment, attempting to steady his racing thoughts. He recalled the countless business negotiations, the moments of crisis he had navigated with calm precision, but nothing had prepared him for this silent, intimate threat, the kind that could unravel everything he had fought to construct, not in the public eye but behind the closed doors of family life. Beth entered the room shortly thereafter, moving with her characteristic elegance, though today her posture seemed slightly rigid, her lips pressed in a line betraying her unease. Michael observed her as she smiled politely at the receptionist, her hands clutching her purse a fraction too tightly. There was something in her eyes, a subtle, fleeting flicker, that both drew him in and sent a cold shiver down his spine. He wanted to ask, to demand, yet a strange hesitation rooted him in place. Dr. Harding emerged, offering a warm smile and a gentle nod. "Michael, we're ready for the ultrasound," he said, his voice steady but carrying a gravity that Michael felt deep in his chest. It was a moment suspended in time, the kind that, once passed, cannot be recalled or undone. Michael rose, placing a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder for a moment, before stepping into the hallway behind Dr. Harding. As they walked, Michael's thoughts churned, a storm of suspicion and fear. Every memory, every detail of Beth's recent behavior, every unexplained transaction now aligned into a pattern too precise to ignore. He reminded himself to stay calm, to observe, to collect facts before judgment. But beneath this veneer of rationality, a part of him quivered with the anticipation of the unknown. What would the screen reveal? And, more importantly, what would it reveal about the woman he had loved for so many years? The hallway stretched before them, bright with natural light filtering through tall windows, yet Michael felt the weight of impending revelation pressing down on him. In that silence, he realized that nothing in the world could have prepared him for what he was about to witness, that this appointment might very well mark the beginning of an entirely new chapter, one of heartbreak, betrayal, and choices whose consequences could ripple through every facet of his carefully constructed life. And as the door to the ultrasound room opened, a cold clarity settled over Michael. The life he had known, its comfort, its security, its illusions, was about to confront the most profound truth he had ever faced. Michael entered the ultrasound room, feeling an unusual tightness in his chest. The sterile scent of antiseptic mingled with the faint warmth from the overhead lamp, and for a moment, he simply stood, absorbing the quiet hum of the machinery. Beth lay on the examination table, her fingers nervously twisting the edge of the sheet beneath her. Michael studied her carefully. There was a tension in her jaw, a subtle flicker of fear in her eyes, that did not belong to a simple prenatal visit. Dr. Harding gestured for Michael to take a seat. "Everything should be routine," he said, though the slight crease between his brows betrayed a caution he did not voice aloud. Michael nodded, trying to steady his pulse, but his mind raced. Every image on the screen, every flicker of the ultrasound, could reveal a truth he was not ready to face. He was a man accustomed to controlling circumstances, negotiating contracts, and anticipating market fluctuations, but I think it's important, Michael continued, that we review certain details of our prior interactions, to ensure that all parties understand each other fully. He spoke with precision, deliberately vague but suggestive, the undertone implying awareness far beyond Vale's assumption. Vale raised an eyebrow, curiosity flickering across his face. "Details? What do you mean?" Beth's hand brushed his arm, tentative, almost pleading. "Michael. I never meant," her voice broke, a sound that had once brought warmth to his heart now twisting it with pain. He did not recoil, nor did he soften. Instead, he allowed himself to acknowledge her humanity without absolving her actions. The distinction was sharp, cold, and necessary. He glanced briefly at her, searching for the woman he had once believed he knew entirely. The poised, graceful Elizabeth who had charmed him at first sight seemed like a distant memory, a shadow overlaid with uncertainty and fear. And yet, beneath the layers of betrayal, Michael sensed a fragile, human core, a reminder that even those who err profoundly are still, at their essence, human beings. When they arrived back in the waiting room, Daniel Hayes was waiting, his expression guarded, a subtle question lingering in his eyes. Michael met his friend's gaze with calm precision, giving nothing away, yet internally, his mind was already at work. Strategies, contingencies, protective measures for both the company and his son, ethical yet unyielding, all jostled for priority. Daniel, perceptive as always, seemed to sense the storm beneath Michael's composed exterior but wisely remained silent. Ethan's school bag lay on the chair beside the window. Michael's eyes softened momentarily at the sight, reminders of the life that remained worth preserving, the innocence untouched by the complications of adult deceit. He allowed himself a single, deep breath, a brief reprieve before the inevitable confrontation at home. Every step back to the car, every measured movement, was weighted with the knowledge that the coming hours would test every fiber of patience, every ounce of resolve he possessed. Driving through the quiet suburban streets, Michael's mind alternated between calculation and introspection. The betrayal had been revealed not through gossip or rumor, but through incontrovertible evidence. The clarity of the truth brought with it a paradoxical calm, a sense of control over the uncontrollable. Yet beneath that calm lingered the quiet ache of loss, a mourning for the life he had assumed he would have, the trust he had extended, and the love that now bore a fracture beyond repair. Beth remained silent, her eyes fixed on the passing landscape, the sunlight glinting off the polished surfaces of parked cars and manicured lawns. Michael resisted the urge to speak immediately, to fill the silence with questions or accusations. Instead, he allowed the tension to exist in the space between them, a slow, deliberate, almost surgical acknowledgement of the truth. This was the beginning of reckoning, and haste would compromise clarity. Arriving at the driveway, Michael paused. He took a long moment to study Beth, to imprint the image in his mind, not with malice, but with understanding. The house they had built together, the walls, the furniture, the carefully curated facade of normalcy, suddenly felt like a stage, a set upon which the private dramas of betrayal and secrecy had been enacted. He realized that this home, once a sanctuary, was now a theater of confrontation, of choices that could redefine every relationship within it. Ethan appeared in the doorway, unaware of the tempest brewing beneath the surface. Michael's heart clenched, a reminder of what truly mattered. Protecting his son, ensuring the continuity of his well-being and stability, had eclipsed every other concern. The house itself, the financial empire, even the betrayal, all secondary to the responsibilities toward the child whose innocence depended entirely on the decisions Michael would make in the days ahead. Beth's hand lingered near the car door, hesitant, and for a fleeting moment, Michael sensed a glimmer of the woman he had once loved. But the clarity of the ultrasound, the incontrovertible evidence, reminded him that the past could not be undone, and the future demanded vigilance, strategy, and measured action. He would not act in anger alone, he would act with precision, protecting those who were innocent, preparing for the inevitable consequences of betrayal. As he opened the car door, Michael felt a mixture of resolve and sorrow, a duality that defined every moment of his life in the hours ahead. The storm had arrived, silent yet palpable, and he understood that navigating it would require all the skills he had honed in business, now applied to the most intimate and volatile domain, family. He looked at Beth one last time before sliding into the driver's seat, words unspoken lingering like smoke in the air. The confrontation, the reckoning, the plan, all lay ahead. For Michael Turner, the man who had mastered strategy in the corporate arena, this would be his most difficult and consequential negotiation yet, the restoration of order, the protection of his son, and the navigation of betrayal with both clarity and measured restraint. And as he started the engine, the quiet hum of the car a small counterpoint to the storm within, Michael Turner knew that nothing would ever be the same, and that the choices he would make from this moment onward would echo through every corner of his life, reshaping it irrevocably, morally, and inevitably. Chapter 2, Web of Deception. The morning sun streamed through the blinds of the Turner residence, casting a lattice of light and shadow across the polished wooden floors. Michael sat at the kitchen table, hands folded, a cup of untouched coffee growing cold before him. Across from him, Beth moved with a deliberate caution, clearing dishes with an almost theatrical precision, as if her every gesture had been measured to avoid drawing attention to herself. The air was thick with unspoken words, and each tick of the clock on the wall punctuated the silence, amplifying the tension that neither dared to name. Michael's mind was a meticulous ledger of observations, emotions, and calculations. He noted the subtle hesitation in Beth's movements, the way she avoided eye contact, the almost imperceptible flinch when he reached for the cream. Every detail, however minor, was recorded and catalogued. Betrayal was not only about the act itself, he thought, it was in the pattern, the hidden logic, the web of decisions that led to it. And the web had threads he was only beginning to untangle. Beth paused at the sink, hands submerged in warm water, and exhaled quietly. Michael could hear the faint tremor in her breath, a sound he had once associated with fatigue or exertion, but now recognized as fear, guilt, and anticipation all mixed together. He wanted to speak, to demand answers, yet a part of him resisted the instinct for confrontation. Timing, as he had learned in boardrooms and legal negotiations, was everything. And this, he realized, was a negotiation of a different, infinitely more delicate kind. Dr. Harding's words from the previous day haunted him still. The ultrasound had revealed the undeniable truth, and Michael could no longer ignore the pattern he had observed in recent months, the unexplained absences, the sudden purchases, the furtive glances. They were no longer coincidences but calculated maneuvers within a narrative he was only beginning to read. Beth's expression, so carefully maintained, had already given away fragments of that story, and Michael had collected each fragment with the precision of a man who understood that evidence, once seen, could not be unseen. Beth finally turned toward him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of apprehension and pleading. "Michael, please, she began, her voice trembling with the weight of unspoken confessions. He did not interrupt, did not respond immediately. Instead, he allowed a silence to stretch between them, a deliberate space in which the magnitude of their reality could be felt, acknowledged, and weighed. Silence, he knew, could speak louder than any accusation. As he studied her, Michael's mind drifted to Ethan. The boy had unknowingly become the fulcrum of their current predicament. Protecting him was paramount, a responsibility that demanded both emotional control and strategic foresight. Michael's eyes softened momentarily at the thought of Ethan, the bright, energetic boy whose trust and innocence had always been implicit in his father's decisions. And yet, beneath that softness, the steely resolve remained: there could be no compromise with betrayal, not when the stakes included the well-being of someone so precious. Beth's gaze dropped to the floor. She seemed smaller now, diminished by the enormity of what had been revealed. The carefully constructed persona she had maintained, the poised, charitable, graceful exterior, had been stripped away in the light of truth. Michael observed this transformation, noting both its inevitability and its intensity. There was a lesson here, he realized: human behavior, when confronted with exposure, could not maintain its pretenses. The web of deception would always unravel, sooner or later. Michael finally spoke, his voice measured, controlled. "Elizabeth, we need to be honest with each other," he said, each word deliberate, like pieces being placed carefully on a chessboard. "There's no room for half-truths anymore. I need clarity." Beth's lips quivered, her hands clenching the edge of the counter. I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she whispered, but the conviction behind her words wavered, and Michael recognized the internal conflict that had been brewing for months. Her carefully plotted facade, her efforts to maintain appearances, were collapsing under the weight of inevitability. Michael's mind catalogued every nuance, every subtle gesture of remorse and fear. He thought of his own journey, from the sweat-stained floors of textile factories to the executive offices of Turner Textiles, from the exhilaration of contracts secured to the quiet satisfaction of building a legacy. He understood ambition, negotiation, and strategy, but betrayal within the intimate confines of family introduced a calculus far more complex and far more perilous. He rose slowly, moving toward the window to study the suburban streets bathed in morning light. There was a deceptive serenity outside, neighbors walking dogs, children laughing in yards, the faint hum of traffic in the distance. Yet within the walls of this home, every assumption had been challenged, every certainty undermined. The ordinary world outside continued in ignorance of the quiet unraveling of a marriage, the secret threads of deceit, and the meticulous mental strategies being constructed to navigate the fallout. Beth followed his gaze, her voice barely audible. "Michael, please, we can figure this out." He turned to her, eyes steady, voice calm but firm. "We will figure it out," he replied. "But the first step is truth. Complete truth. No exceptions, no omissions. The weight of the moment pressed down on both of them, a tangible force that neither could ignore. Michael could feel the slow, deliberate acceleration of his thoughts, each mental calculation a step toward understanding, toward planning, toward protecting what remained inviolate. Ethan's trust, his future, and the stability of Turner Textiles, all intertwined in a delicate balance that demanded vigilance, precision, and foresight. For a long moment, they stood in silence, two figures caught in a web of their own making, each aware of the fragility of the moment, each conscious of the irreversible nature of the revelations that had come to light. Michael's mind, ever analytical, catalogued options, consequences, and strategies. He understood now that confrontation alone would not suffice, action would require calculation, foresight, and patience, the same skills that had guided him through every other challenge in life, now applied to the most intimate and emotionally charged arena he had ever faced. Beth finally lowered her gaze, her posture slackening as if surrendering to the inevitable. Michael knew this was only the beginning. The days ahead would test the limits of their endurance, challenge every assumption, and force decisions whose consequences would reverberate through every corner of their lives. And yet, beneath the weight of betrayal, Michael felt a quiet, resolute determination. He would navigate this storm with clarity, precision, and unwavering protection for his son. As he left the kitchen, stepping onto the polished hardwood floors, Michael Turner understood that their lives had shifted irrevocably. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with emotional peril and difficult choices, but he carried with him the tools he had honed over decades: calm observation, strategic thinking, and an unyielding sense of responsibility. And in that understanding, he found a measure of strength, a faint yet enduring light within the shadowed landscape of deception. Later that afternoon, Michael found himself in his home office, the door closed and locked, a small, self-imposed sanctuary of quiet in which he could finally think without the weight of Beth's presence. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting narrow stripes across the dark oak desk where contracts, ledgers, and correspondence were neatly arranged. He sat back in his chair, rubbing his temples, and let the reality of the day settle in. The ultrasound, the dates, the incontrovertible proof, it all demanded a response, yet he knew that any rash action would compromise the clarity he so desperately needed. He thought of Beth, pacing softly in the kitchen earlier, her hands wringing the edge of a dish towel, her voice trembling even as she tried to mask it with calm words. He remembered the way her eyes had avoided his, the fleeting flicker of panic that betrayed more than words ever could. He understood fear. He had negotiated hostile takeovers and navigated corporate crises, but fear mingled with guilt and desperation was a different matter entirely, intimate, merciless, and potent. Michael's thoughts turned to Ethan. The boy, unaware of the currents of betrayal swirling just beyond the surface of his home, represented the axis around which every decision now revolved. Protecting him would not be a simple matter of confrontation, it would require meticulous planning, safeguarding of trust, and careful management of every revelation. Michael's experience in the business world had taught him the importance of timing, precision, and patience. Now, these same skills would guide him in the realm of family, a far more delicate and emotionally charged environment. He opened his laptop and began to compile information discreetly. Emails, receipts, small inconsistencies, all data points that, when connected, could reveal the larger narrative. As he worked, the enormity of the deception weighed on him. Beth's actions were deliberate, the result of choices made over months, carefully hidden from view. Michael felt a combination of anger, sorrow, and grim fascination. The web of deception was intricate, and unraveling it required both analytical rigor and emotional restraint. A knock at the door startled him, and Daniel Hayes stepped in, briefcase in hand. Michael gestured for him to sit, acknowledging the silent understanding that had long existed between them. Daniel's eyes were sharp, perceptive, quietly assessing the tension that lingered in the room. "Michael," Daniel began cautiously, "you look tense. Everything okay?" Michael allowed himself a small, measured sigh. "I've learned some things today," he said evenly, not yet willing to articulate the full gravity of the situation. Daniel's brow furrowed, a subtle recognition of the unspoken weight. He did not press, he knew better than to force disclosure when restraint was required. For Michael, the moment of processing was essential. His mind traced the past several months, cataloging Beth's absences, the unusual expenses, the furtive phone calls. Each anomaly, once trivial, now formed a pattern that was unmistakable. And yet, he restrained himself from immediate confrontation. He needed more, confirmation, evidence, and a strategy that would ensure the integrity of both his family and his business. Beth entered the room quietly, her movements cautious, aware of the silent calculation in Michael's gaze. "Michael. She began, faltering as her eyes sought his. Michael did not speak immediately. He let the silence stretch, allowing her unease to manifest fully, to confront the consequences of her choices internally before words could intervene. Silence, he knew, could be a tool as potent as any confrontation. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm, deliberate. "Elizabeth, there are questions I need answered, and I expect complete honesty. No half-truths, no omissions. It's the only way we can proceed without further damage." Beth's lips quivered. She nodded slowly, the color draining from her face, revealing a vulnerability Michael had rarely seen in public. In that moment, he recognized the full human dimension of betrayal, the fear, the shame, the fragile hope for forgiveness. But he also understood the imperative of strategy, the necessity of measured action in the face of emotional turbulence. Michael turned back to his laptop, opening a secure spreadsheet he had begun compiling. Each entry was meticulously documented: dates, financial anomalies, observed behavior, patterns of absence. He thought about the intersection of evidence and intuition, the delicate balance between the concrete and the psychological. To act without understanding would be reckless, to delay without planning would be equally dangerous. Beth's voice broke through the hum of the room. "Michael, please, I can explain everything." He looked up at her, eyes steady, tone unwavering. "I will listen," he said simply, "but you must understand, explanation does not erase consequence. The truth must be accounted for in every decision from this point forward." The intensity of the moment pressed upon both of them. Michael could feel the undercurrent of fear, the subtle tension coiling like a spring in Beth's posture. She was aware of the stakes, the fragility of their home, and the necessity of the careful navigation required to salvage what remained of trust and stability. As they sat together in that quiet office, Michael recognized the duality of the situation: profound personal betrayal intertwined with a strategic challenge. The lessons of decades in business, analysis, patience, foresight, were now applied to the intimate arena of family life, where emotions ran deep, consequences were immediate, and the stakes involved not just material assets, but the hearts and minds of the people he loved most. Michael allowed himself a slow breath, steadying the storm within. The day had begun with revelation, now it would continue with observation, planning, and the careful orchestration of actions that could protect his son, safeguard his company, and, perhaps, allow the possibility of resolution without irrevocable harm. And in that controlled, tense quiet, he understood, this was no longer merely a private struggle, it was the first move in a game of endurance, strategy, and moral reckoning. Every decision, every action, every carefully chosen word would resonate far beyond this afternoon, shaping the course of lives, relationships, and futures in ways both immediate and unforeseen. Michael's eyes flicked briefly to Beth, a mixture of sorrow and resolve coiling in his chest. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with emotional peril, yet illuminated by a single, unassailable truth: the deception had been revealed, and now the work of reckoning, rebuilding, and navigating the consequences would begin in earnest. Evening fell slowly over the Turner residence, the last traces of sunlight slipping through the blinds and leaving the rooms bathed in soft shadows. Michael remained in his office, reviewing documents, cross-referencing dates, and making careful notes. The quiet hum of the computer was the only sound, a steady pulse against the turmoil he felt within. Each entry he examined confirmed a growing pattern: Beth's absences, unexplained expenses, the subtle inconsistencies that now pointed unmistakably to deception. He paused and leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment. Memories of their early years together drifted unbidden into his mind, the first dinner when she had smiled at him across the table, the long walks discussing hopes and ambitions, the shared laughter over small domestic absurdities. It felt almost cruel, how vividly the past contrasted with the present reality. Betrayal, he realized, was not only the shattering of trust, it was the sudden, stark reconfiguration of memory, the unsettling realization that the past had been partially built on illusions. Beth entered the room quietly, her movements cautious, almost apologetic. She stopped near the doorway, hands clasped together, a faint tremor in her posture. Michael did not immediately acknowledge her presence. He allowed the tension to linger, knowing that the weight of unspoken words could serve as a mirror for the gravity of their situation. In silence, truths often speak louder than confessions. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and hesitant. "Michael. I know I've made mistakes. He held up a hand, stopping her gently but firmly. "Elizabeth, mistakes are not always accidental," he said, his voice calm yet edged with a firmness that left no room for equivocation. "The choices you've made over the past months have consequences, and it's time we account for them." She swallowed hard, eyes glistening with tears she could not quite hold back. "I didn't mean to hurt you, or Ethan. I never wanted it to go this far," she whispered, each word fragile, a small tremor in the tension-filled air. Michael studied her, cataloging every micro-expression, every subtle tremor, every flicker of fear. He understood remorse, he understood fear, but he also understood responsibility and consequence. Betrayal was not simply a matter of emotion, it was a factor that could, if mishandled, destroy the family, their home, and even the foundation of his business. He needed to proceed with precision, with the same careful deliberation he had always applied in moments of high stakes. Beth stepped closer, hesitant. "Michael, please. Let me explain everything." He shook his head slightly. "Explanations are only useful if they lead to clarity," he replied softly. "We will speak, but carefully. Every word, every piece of information, must be truthful. No omissions, no embellishments." A long pause followed. The room seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the distant hum of suburban life continued, children playing, dogs barking, cars passing, but inside, a more profound silence had taken hold, a stillness heavy with anticipation and latent conflict. Michael felt the full measure of what lay ahead. Every decision in the coming days would ripple outward, affecting not just the immediate family but the very architecture of trust, loyalty, and consequence. He finally stood, moving toward the window to study the fading light. The calm exterior of their neighborhood offered a stark contrast to the turmoil inside the home, a reminder that appearances can mask complexity, and that life's external serenity often hides inner storms. Michael knew he would need to navigate both realities, the world as it appeared to others, and the world as it truly existed within these walls. Beth remained near the doorway, watching him, a mixture of fear and tentative hope in her gaze. "Michael. I don't know what comes next," she admitted quietly. He turned to her, eyes steady, voice calm. "Neither do I," he said honestly. "But we do know what is happening, and that knowledge gives us a starting point. From here, we decide how to move forward, with honesty, caution, and thoughtfulness." In that moment, Michael felt a weight settle upon him, not the heavy, paralyzing weight of despair, but the deliberate, tempered weight of responsibility. He understood the stakes. Ethan's innocence, the stability of Turner Textiles, the integrity of his own moral compass. He understood that every subsequent action would require patience, strategic foresight, and the careful application of both emotional intelligence and rational calculation. Beth's head lowered, her shoulders slumping slightly, the tension in her posture softening. For the first time in hours, Michael sensed a fragile alignment between them, a recognition that the path forward would demand collaboration, honesty, and deliberate effort, even if born of necessity rather than reconciliation. Michael returned to his desk, opening a fresh sheet of notes. He began to outline a careful plan, documenting evidence, securing assets, considering the timing and manner of conversations, protecting Ethan from the immediate fallout and preparing for the eventual confrontation that would define the next phase of their lives. Each step was calculated, deliberate, and measured. He would act with integrity, strategy, and unwavering attention to consequence. As the evening deepened, the shadows lengthened across the office floor, and the room became quieter still. Michael knew that the coming days would challenge every skill he had cultivated over decades: analysis, patience, judgment, and emotional resilience. The revelation had set in motion a series of events that could not be reversed, but it also offered an opportunity to act decisively, to protect those who were innocent, and to navigate betrayal with clarity and strength. Beth finally spoke again, her voice soft, almost reverent. "Michael. I understand. I'll tell you everything. No secrets this time." He nodded slowly, feeling a measure of cautious relief. The work had begun. Truth, once acknowledged, could be managed. Lies, once exposed, demanded careful navigation. And for Michael Turner, the responsibility for guiding both truth and consequence rested squarely on his shoulders. The day ended with a quiet understanding: the web of deception had been revealed, the stakes had been defined, and the first steps toward resolution and protection had been taken. In the silent aftermath, Michael allowed himself a brief, controlled breath. The storm was far from over, but now, at least, he had a map of its contours, and a measure of control over how it would be navigated. Chapter 3: A Truth Too Painful. The next morning, the house was eerily silent. The faint glow of dawn filtered through the blinds, casting long, narrow shadows across the polished floors. Michael sat in the study, coffee untouched, staring at the documents that had become the cornerstone of his reality. The ultrasound report, the meticulously compiled notes, the inconsistencies carefully catalogued, all pieces of a puzzle that now formed an inescapable truth. He remembered the flight to Tokyo earlier that year, the long nights signing contracts, the late phone calls from clients overseas. He had been away for weeks, wholly consumed by the obligations of his business, confident that the life at home, his marriage, his family, remained intact. And yet, the evidence before him now made one thing painfully clear: it had not. Beth had betrayed him. Not in whispers or rumors, but in a tangible, undeniable way. Michael's mind wrestled with the complexity of the emotions swirling inside him: disbelief, sorrow, rage, and a cold, calculated resolve that had begun to take shape over the preceding days. Each feeling competed for dominance, yet none could entirely suppress the others. Betrayal, he realized, was a force that fractured the psyche as much as it fractured trust. The moment of clarity had come when Dr. Harding had spoken. "Michael, the timing doesn't match," the doctor had said gently, but with unyielding precision. "The fetus is older than reported. The conception dates back to a period when you were abroad." "I'm very sorry." Michael had felt the world tilt beneath him, a slow, inexorable shift that left him both numb and hyper-aware. He had stared at the images on the ultrasound monitor, numbers and measurements that carried a weight heavier than any words could convey. And in that moment, a part of him, rational, analytical, strategic, had begun to map the consequences. The betrayal was not only personal, it was practical, logistical, an intrusion into every aspect of his carefully constructed life. He rose from his chair and walked to the window, looking out over the quiet suburban street. Children's laughter floated from a nearby yard, a cruel counterpoint to the tempest within. Neighbors went about their routines, oblivious to the storm that had swept through the Turner household. Michael felt the strange duality of existence, a world continuing in ordinary rhythm while his own life had been irrevocably altered. Beth entered the room quietly, her eyes red from restless sleep, her posture tentative. "Michael, please," she began, her voice quivering. But he did not respond immediately. He let the silence stretch, knowing that the weight of the truth demanded its own acknowledgement before any conversation could proceed. Finally, he spoke, voice steady, tone controlled but edged with a cold precision. "Elizabeth, we need to talk," he said, each word deliberate, carrying the gravity of consequences that would ripple far beyond this room. The evidence is clear. The timing, the truth, there is no ambiguity. She swallowed hard, tears welling, lips trembling. I never wanted this, she whispered. I never meant for you to find out like this. Michael's eyes narrowed slightly, cataloging every micro-expression, every subtle tremor that betrayed her inner conflict. He understood fear, he understood guilt, but he also understood the absolute necessity of measured response. The emotional intensity of the moment was secondary to the clarity of the facts before him. Betrayal demanded strategy, not impulsive reaction. He approached the desk, picking up the ultrasound images and reports, studying them again with the meticulous attention of a man trained to find patterns, discrepancies, and truths hidden in plain sight. The calculations of the past months, the inconsistencies, the secretive meetings, the unexplained expenditures, aligned with the new information. Every intuition Michael had felt in recent months was now validated. Beth's voice, fragile and trembling, cut through the quiet. Michael, please. I can explain. He looked up at her, expression calm, voice measured but unwavering. Explanations do not undo what has been done, he said. But I will hear them. Full truth. No omissions. Her shoulders slumped slightly, the first genuine sign of surrender in weeks. Michael noted the subtle shift, recognizing it as both a vulnerability and an admission. The facade she had maintained, the carefully curated mask of composure, of innocence, was now crumbling, exposed by the incontrovertible evidence of her actions. For a long moment, neither spoke. Michael's mind moved rapidly, calculating, cataloging, and projecting the consequences of each decision he could make. The betrayal was personal, yes, but it also had practical ramifications. Ethan's trust, the integrity of the household, the stability of his business, all were intertwined with the choices he would now make. One misstep could magnify the damage, one measured, deliberate action could contain it. Finally, he broke the silence. Elizabeth, this changes everything, he said softly. Not only for us, but for Ethan, for the family, for everything we've built. You need to understand that consequences are inevitable. Her lips quivered, eyes wide with dawning horror. I understand, she whispered, voice barely audible. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. Michael's mind, however, was already several steps ahead. Making it right was not simply about apologies or remorse, it was about accountability, protection of what was innocent, and preparation for the actions that would inevitably follow. The strategic part of his mind, the part that had navigated decades of business negotiation, corporate risk, and complex human dynamics, had taken control. He allowed himself a brief, controlled exhale, a way to steady the storm within. The revelation had shattered the facade of normalcy, but it also illuminated the path forward. Truth, once confronted, allowed for calculation, betrayal, once known, demanded response. Michael Turner understood that the days ahead would test every skill, every ounce of patience, every measure of moral and emotional endurance he possessed. Beth remained standing, her posture fragile, her expression a mixture of fear, shame, and tentative hope. Michael's eyes softened briefly, not in forgiveness, but in recognition of the human complexity before him. Even those who betray are still human, yet their actions carry consequences that cannot be ignored. He gestured for her to sit, opening a space for dialogue within the strict boundaries he had set. We will proceed carefully, he said. Every decision, every conversation, every step will be deliberate. For Ethan, for us, for the integrity of what remains. But understand this, betrayal has consequences, and you will be held accountable. Beth nodded, swallowing hard. The weight of the moment settled over them both, a quiet acknowledgement of irreversible truth, the gravity of choices, and the beginning of a reckoning that would define the next chapters of their lives. Michael turned back to the reports, the ultrasound images, and the meticulously compiled notes. In the quiet of the study, he allowed a brief internal acknowledgement. The world had shifted irreversibly, but he retained clarity, control, and the ability to protect what was most important. The storm had arrived, but it would be navigated with strategy, precision, and unwavering resolve. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows of the Turner study, throwing narrow beams across the dark oak desk. Michael sat back, hands clasped, eyes scanning the documents spread before him, though his mind had already begun tracing a path far beyond the paper. Every detail mattered: the dates, the receipts, the inconsistencies, the subtle patterns of deception that had finally revealed themselves. He could not act hastily, the stakes were too high, and the consequences too far-reaching. He remembered his own methodical years building Turner Textiles, starting as a young man in a sweat-stained factory, learning the rhythms of machinery, the discipline of deadlines, the language of contracts. Strategy, observation, and patience had carried him through every challenge in the business world. Now, those same skills were required in the arena of family, of betrayal. And yet, the challenge was infinitely more personal, infinitely more perilous. Beth entered the study quietly, carrying a small stack of papers, bank statements, hotel receipts, a list of charges on their joint account. Her hands trembled slightly, betraying her anxiety despite her attempts to maintain composure. She set the papers down and looked at Michael, her eyes pleading for some form of mercy, for understanding. "Michael, please. I'll explain everything," she began, her voice fragile. Michael did not speak immediately. He allowed the silence to stretch, allowing both of them to feel the weight of the moment. Silence, he knew, was a tool as sharp as any accusation. It forced reflection, confrontation with internal truths, and acknowledgement of consequences. Finally, he spoke, calm, measured, but unwavering. "Elizabeth. I will hear everything. But understand this, truth alone will not erase what has been done. Consequences are inevitable. What matters now is how we proceed." Beth swallowed hard, lowering her gaze. I understand," she whispered. Michael's mind, however, had already moved beyond the present moment. He was plotting, calculating, and anticipating the next steps. The betrayal had opened a fissure in their lives, and he needed to ensure that it did not become a chasm. Protecting Ethan was paramount, securing their home, finances, and the integrity of Turner Textiles followed closely behind. Every action he would take now required precision, patience, and strategic foresight. He stood and walked slowly to the window, looking out at the quiet suburban street. The world outside seemed untouched, peaceful in its ignorance. Children played, neighbors waved at each other, life continued with ordinary predictability. And yet, within the walls of this house, a storm raged, one that demanded careful navigation, one that would test every measure of human resilience and strategic thinking. Turning back to Beth, Michael's eyes were steady, measured, unwavering. "Elizabeth, we are at a crossroads. I need complete honesty, every detail, every interaction, every decision you made. It's the only way I can make informed decisions about what comes next." Beth's lips quivered. I will tell you everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael returned to his desk and opened his laptop, his fingers moving deliberately across the keys as he began compiling, cross-referencing, and cataloging the evidence. Emails, bank statements, phone records, all became pieces of a larger puzzle. The more he examined, the clearer the pattern became. The web of deception, intricate and methodical, now revealed itself in its full scope. He paused for a moment, letting his mind drift to Ethan. The boy's bright energy, his laughter, his trust, fragile and precious, was at the center of every calculation, every plan, every thought. Protecting him required not just confrontation, but careful orchestration. The emotional fallout needed to be managed with foresight and tact, as much as with firmness and clarity. Beth approached cautiously, watching Michael work. "Michael, what are you planning?" she asked, her voice edged with both fear and curiosity. He did not look up. "I am planning how to preserve what is important, Ethan, our family's stability, and the integrity of everything we've built," he replied calmly. Your choices have consequences, Elizabeth. I will protect what is innocent, and I will address what has been broken. The weight of those words hung in the air, unspoken yet undeniable. Beth's eyes widened, recognition and fear flickering in her expression. She had underestimated the depth of his resolve, the clarity of his strategic mind. The woman who had thought she could manipulate circumstance had not fully understood the man she had betrayed. Michael's thoughts turned to the practical steps ahead. First, secure assets, ensure Ethan's environment remained stable. Next, document all interactions, preserving a record that could prevent further deceit. Finally, plan measured confrontations that would extract accountability without unnecessary escalation. Every move was deliberate, a careful application of logic to an emotionally charged battlefield. He paused, letting himself consider the human dimension. Betrayal carried with it a complex mix of anger, sorrow, and moral reckoning. He recognized the weight on Beth's conscience, yet he also understood that acknowledgement alone would not rectify the harm. Action was required, guided by both ethics and strategy. Beth spoke again, her voice trembling. Michael. I never wanted it to come to this. I didn't think. He held up a hand to stop her, his eyes steady. I understand what you didn't think. But the reality is here. And it requires careful, deliberate navigation. Emotions will not dictate the next steps. Clarity, preparation, and truth will. Michael returned to the documents, reviewing them again, planning the immediate steps, safeguarding the household, preparing for confrontations, documenting evidence, and protecting Ethan. The storm of betrayal had arrived, but he would not be swept away by it. Every action would be calculated, every decision weighed, every step deliberate. As the day waned into evening, the house grew quieter, shadows deepening across the floors. Michael continued his work, a calm, resolute presence amidst the tension. The betrayal had been revealed, the stakes defined, and the first steps toward resolution and accountability had begun. In that quiet, he felt a strange sense of clarity and control. The storm was far from over, but it could be navigated. Night had fallen over the Turner residence, leaving the house in a muted, shadowed quiet. Michael remained in the study, the soft glow of a desk lamp illuminating the documents before him. He had spent the evening reviewing every detail, every piece of evidence, cross-referencing dates, transactions, and communications. The patterns were undeniable, the truth inescapable. Betrayal, once hidden, had now become a concrete, immovable reality. Beth approached the desk cautiously, her eyes heavy with apprehension. Michael. I know you know everything, she whispered, her voice trembling. Please, just let me explain before you decide anything. He looked up at her, the weight of the day reflected in his calm but steely gaze. Elizabeth, explanations alone will not change what has happened. The facts are clear. We can discuss the details, but the reality, the consequences, cannot be undone. Her hands shook as she reached for a chair, but Michael gestured for her to remain standing. He wanted her upright, alert, fully aware of the gravity of the moment. I need you to understand the full measure of this, he continued. Every action, every choice, every moment of concealment has ramifications. And those ramifications affect not just us, but Ethan. Tears welled in her eyes, and she struggled to maintain composure. I didn't mean for this to happen, she said, her voice breaking. I never wanted to hurt him, or you. Michael's chest tightened, not with anger, but with a profound sense of responsibility. He understood the pain, the guilt, the fear reflected in her expression. Yet he also knew that acknowledging it would not suffice. Action, deliberate and precise, was now required. He could not allow emotions alone to guide him. He had to protect what was innocent, safeguard the family, and establish boundaries that could prevent further harm. He stood, moving slowly toward her. Every step was deliberate, measured, a quiet assertion of control amidst the emotional turbulence. Elizabeth, he said softly but firmly, the choices you've made cannot be ignored. But now that we know the truth, we have a path forward. It will not be easy. It will not be without consequence. But it will be deliberate, and it will be controlled. Beth's shoulders slumped, a fragile acknowledgement of her own vulnerability. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right, she whispered. Michael studied her, cataloging every nuance of expression, every tremor in her posture, every flicker of fear in her eyes. He recognized remorse, and he understood that it was genuine, yet he also knew that remorse alone could not repair the damage. Accountability and action were required. He returned to his desk, lifting the ultrasound images and the documents once more. "We will take steps," he said, "to protect Ethan, to secure what is rightfully ours, and to ensure that the truth is fully acknowledged. There will be consequences, Elizabeth. But there will also be a measured plan, one that considers every factor, every possibility, every outcome." Beth nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "I understand. I really do," she whispered. Michael allowed himself a brief, steadying breath. The storm of betrayal had arrived in full force, yet he retained clarity, strategy, and focus. He knew the decisions he made tonight would reverberate through the family, through Ethan's life, and through the household itself. The challenge was immense, but he had faced great challenges before, in business, in life, and he would navigate this one with the same resolve, tempered now by personal stakes and moral imperatives. "Sit down," he said finally, motioning toward the chair across from him. "We need to talk about everything, every detail, every interaction, every choice. No omissions. No half-truths. The moment for concealment is over." Beth sank into the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked up at him, eyes wide, tears brimming. "I'll tell you everything," she said. Michael nodded. The first confrontation had begun, deliberate and controlled. Words, explanations, and admissions would follow, but they would be guided by the measured plan he had formulated over the past days. Nothing would be left to chance, no further surprises could be tolerated. In the quiet of the study, a profound understanding settled between them. The betrayal had been revealed, and now the work of reckoning had begun. Michael felt the full measure of responsibility on his shoulders, the responsibility to protect Ethan, to secure the family's integrity, and to navigate the moral complexities of this human drama with clarity, precision, and resolve. For the first time in hours, Beth exhaled slowly, allowing a semblance of relief to touch her face. She knew the confrontation was inevitable, that the truth could no longer be hidden, and that Michael's response would define the next chapter of their lives. Michael returned his gaze to the documents, reviewing them once more. The evidence was irrefutable, the truth, unassailable. And in that certainty, he found his resolve. Betrayal, he knew, demanded accountability. Consequences were unavoidable. And yet, within the structure of deliberate action, there was control, there was direction, and there was the possibility, however fragile, of protection, preservation, and eventual resolution. As the night deepened, the Turner residence remained quiet, the only sounds the soft rustling of papers, the faint hum of the city beyond, and the measured, deliberate breathing of two people facing a truth too painful to ignore. In that quiet, Michael Turner understood, the storm had arrived, the reckoning had begun, and the path forward, though fraught with peril, was now defined by clarity, strategy, and an unwavering commitment to protect what was most important. Chapter 4, The Retribution Plan. Morning arrived with a pale light seeping through the blinds of Michael Turner's home office. The house was quiet, almost deceptively calm, while within him, a storm of thoughts churned. Betrayal had been laid bare, the facts irrefutable, and the path forward, though clear in principle, required painstaking planning. Every detail mattered, every potential reaction had to be anticipated, every consequence weighed. Michael's first consideration was Ethan. The boy's innocence, his trust, and his emotional stability were paramount. Michael could not allow the turbulence created by Beth's betrayal to fracture the child's sense of security. Protecting him would guide every action, every decision, and every conversation. The emotional stakes were no less critical than the practical ones, but they demanded equal precision. He opened his laptop and began to review what he knew about Andrew Vale, the man with whom Beth had been involved. Vale's public persona was polished, successful, affluent, and outwardly charismatic, but a careful examination revealed cracks beneath the surface. Financial disclosures hinted at risky dealings, inconsistencies, and potential ethical violations. Michael's mind catalogued each observation, noting the intersections where personal betrayal and professional vulnerability might overlap. For hours, he worked methodically, cross-referencing corporate filings, public records, and news archives. The patterns emerged slowly, like pieces of a complex machine revealing their purpose. He understood that revenge, if it were to be effective and ethical, required precision, exposure of wrongdoing without resorting to cruelty, protection of the innocent, and the strategic dismantling of any advantage held by the betrayer. His thoughts occasionally wandered to Beth. Despite the betrayal, she was still the mother of his child, still a figure he needed to manage with a blend of firmness and tact. There was no room for emotional impulsivity. This was not the time for confrontation driven by anger alone. He had learned over decades in business that strategy was always superior to reaction. In the same way, his response to this personal crisis required the same measured approach. By mid-afternoon, Michael had developed a preliminary plan. He would gather incontrovertible evidence of Vale's indiscretions, documenting every connection, every interaction, and every illicit maneuver. He would coordinate with legal counsel to protect both assets and family rights, ensuring that Beth could not exploit the situation to destabilize their lives further. He would simultaneously protect Ethan from exposure to unnecessary conflict, maintaining the child's routine, stability, and sense of security. The task was daunting, but Michael's resolve was absolute. He made a list, precise and comprehensive: hire a private investigator to confirm Vale's indiscretions, review Beth's finances to identify patterns of misuse or diversion, coordinate with trusted legal and financial advisors, and prepare contingency measures for all eventualities. Every step was deliberate, every action calculated, each aligned with a clear, strategic goal. Evening came, and Michael allowed himself a moment of reflection. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the house was bathed in the warm glow of interior lamps. He thought of his younger years, of the factories, the contracts, the long hours of negotiation, and the meticulous attention to detail that had guided him to success. The lessons learned in business, the careful observation, the anticipation of others' actions, the patience required to see a plan through, were now directly applicable to the personal realm. Betrayal was a problem to be solved with strategy, not emotion. Beth entered the office hesitantly, carrying a folder of documents she had prepared under his instruction. Her movements were careful, deliberate, almost apologetic. Michael did not look up immediately. He allowed her presence to settle into the room, observing her posture, her gestures, the small tremors of fear and remorse that betrayed her inner turmoil. "Michael," she began softly. "I've gathered everything you asked for, the statements, the receipts." He nodded, his attention still partly on the screen. "Thank you. Lay them on the desk," he said. His voice was calm, authoritative, devoid of anger but imbued with the weight of consequence. Every word, every command, was deliberate, signaling that the next steps would not be guided by sentiment but by strategy. As she arranged the documents, Michael's mind traced the contours of the forthcoming confrontation with Vale. He envisioned meetings, exchanges, and revelations, considering how each would unfold and how best to protect both Ethan and his own family. He anticipated potential countermoves, legal challenges, and attempts at manipulation. Each possibility was catalogued, analyzed, and incorporated into his plan. Beth watched him, a mixture of apprehension and cautious respect in her expression. She had begun to understand that Michael's approach to the crisis was neither impulsive nor vengeful in the conventional sense. It was deliberate, calculated, and grounded in a profound sense of responsibility. The betrayal she had caused had unleashed consequences she had not fully anticipated, and she now recognized the depth of thought and strategic precision required to manage them. Michael finally turned his gaze toward her. Elizabeth, understand this, we are not acting out of anger or vengeance. We are acting to protect what is right, to expose wrongdoing, and to maintain the integrity of our family and assets. Every action must be measured, every step deliberate, every consequence anticipated. She nodded, swallowing hard. I understand. I see that now, she said. Her voice was small but sincere, carrying a mixture of fear, remorse, and the faintest glimmer of respect for the careful deliberation she now witnessed. Michael returned to his documents, reviewing them once more. The scope of his plan began to take full shape, the gathering of evidence, the legal positioning, the coordinated confrontation, and the safeguarding of what mattered most. It was a meticulous, layered strategy, designed to minimize collateral damage, protect the innocent, and ensure that the consequences for betrayal were comprehensive and unavoidable. As the night deepened, Michael allowed himself a moment to appreciate the clarity of purpose he had cultivated. The storm of deception and betrayal had been revealed, but in its wake, he had established the framework for control. The path forward was defined, the steps deliberate, and the commitment unwavering. In the quiet of the study, with the documents neatly organized and the first elements of his plan in motion, Michael Turner felt a resolute calm. The road ahead would be challenging, fraught with emotional and strategic pitfalls, but he possessed the clarity, foresight, and determination to navigate it. Betrayal had been revealed, consequences awaited, and retribution, measured, strategic, and just, would follow. The following week dawned crisp and clear, a deceptive calm over the city that belied the tension Michael carried with him. The streets of suburban Chicago seemed ordinary, serene, and routine, families walking their dogs, neighbors tending gardens, the distant hum of traffic, but within the carefully curated sphere of Michael Turner's life, every detail mattered, every observation counted. He could not afford to overlook even the smallest variable. He arrived at the upscale bistro where Andrew Vale had agreed to meet, ostensibly to discuss a joint investment opportunity that Michael had engineered. The restaurant's atmosphere was elegant but casual, designed for conversation rather than spectacle. Michael had chosen it deliberately, public enough to limit Vale's options, controlled enough to give Michael the upper hand. Seated at a corner table, Michael allowed himself a moment to observe. Vale arrived shortly after, confident, charismatic, and oblivious to the storm about to unfold. He greeted Michael with a firm handshake, a practiced smile, and a casual comment about the weather. But Michael noticed the micro-expressions, the slight twitch of an eye, the subtle hesitation in his tone. Every detail was data, every gesture a clue to his state of mind. Andrew, Michael began smoothly, keeping his voice even, calm, and measured, I appreciate you taking the time to meet today. Vale nodded, relaxed, leaning back slightly in his chair. Of course, Michael. Always a pleasure to talk business. Michael allowed a pause, letting the silence stretch just long enough to unsettle Vale. The calm in Michael's demeanor contrasted with the tension in the room, a psychological maneuver honed over decades in negotiation. Every second of quiet was calculated, a subtle assertion of control. Dynamics of the human heart, the hidden choices of those closest to him, remained unpredictable and merciless. As the gel was applied and the transducer moved across Beth's abdomen, Michael's eyes were fixed on the screen. He had expected a simple, predictable image, a small, perfect form of new life. But the readings, when Dr. Harding finally spoke, caused a brief, involuntary tightening in Michael's throat. Michael, Dr. Harding began carefully, almost hesitating, there's something you need to see, something you need to understand about the timeline. His voice was calm, professional, but carried the weight of gravity that Michael had never encountered in a business negotiation. Beth's fingers tightened over the sheet. She exhaled sharply, a small tremor in her chest. Michael's mind raced. Was it a complication with the pregnancy? A medical concern with the child? Every possible scenario flashed through his consciousness, some more terrifying than others. Dr. Harding adjusted the monitor and showed Michael the measurements, the growth charts, the details meticulously recorded. The gestational age, he said carefully, does not match what has been reported. The child appears to be several weeks older than what was expected based on Elizabeth's account. Michael felt a chill creep up his spine. He remembered the month he had spent on a business trip to Tokyo, long hours negotiating contracts, constant meetings, telephone calls that stretched into the late hours. Every day, he had been thousands of miles away. And now, confronted with these figures, a horrifying clarity began to settle over him: the child could not be his. Beth's eyes widened, her lips trembling as if she had sensed this revelation before it was spoken. "Michael." She began, her voice faltering. Michael's own voice was quiet, deliberate, almost cold in its control. "I know," he said. He had no need for the details, no desire for a confession. The evidence, the dates, the measurements, they all told the story with unyielding precision. There was a betrayal here, a fracture in the life he had built, and he could feel its magnitude pressing against every fiber of his being. Dr. Harding, sensing the delicate balance of the moment, remained silent, giving Michael the space to process the information, to absorb the full weight of the truth. Michael's gaze shifted from the monitor to Beth, studying the subtle expressions on her face: fear, regret, panic. He catalogued each nuance, each hesitation, as though analyzing a business proposal, but this was infinitely more personal, infinitely more devastating. For a long moment, Michael simply breathed, his mind tracing the last several months in meticulous detail. Every late night, every unexplained absence, every whispered phone call, it all aligned. The small anomalies he had noticed over time were no longer coincidences, they were pieces of a calculated deception. His marriage, the home he had nurtured, the trust he had invested, it all lay on the precipice of collapse. Beth reached out toward him, her hand shaking. "Michael, please." But he did not move. His fingers rested lightly on the edge of the examination chair, steady but tense, like a man poised to react but holding himself with controlled restraint. Michael understood in that moment that the next actions, the choices he would make, would define not only the fate of this marriage but also the emotional and financial structure of the life he had built. He turned back to the monitor, studying the details Dr. Harding had pointed out. A pattern emerged: the timeline of conception, the dates of absence, the inconsistencies. It was a cold, precise narrative, one that no plea or explanation could erase. Michael's mind, trained for years to weigh evidence and anticipate outcomes, began to sketch the outlines of a plan. Not for revenge yet, not openly, but for clarity, for control, for a way to navigate the devastation with the least damage to what remained sacred: his son, Ethan, and the life he had fought to construct. Beth's breathing was shallow, rapid. The vulnerability in her posture, the tremor in her voice, spoke volumes. She had known, deep down, that the truth was approaching, that her carefully maintained facade could not withstand scrutiny forever. Michael observed her, noting the contrast between the poised woman who hosted charity events and the trembling figure before him. It was a moment stripped of all pretense, revealing the raw human fragility beneath the social mask. Dr. Harding finally spoke again, his voice steady but empathetic. "Michael, I understand this is difficult. I'm here to answer questions, provide information, and support both of you medically. But I want you to understand, the timeline discrepancy is clear." Michael nodded slowly, absorbing the words, feeling the weight settle further into his chest. The quiet hum of the ultrasound machine, the faint rustle of paper charts, the soft padding of the nurse's shoes in the corridor outside, all of it seemed amplified, magnifying the gravity of the revelation. Time itself felt suspended, every second stretching into eternity as he contemplated the choices ahead. Beth's lips quivered. I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered, though the words seemed hollow in the presence of the truth. Michael turned toward her, his gaze steady, his voice calm but unwavering. "I know," he repeated, but there was no comfort in the word. There was only acknowledgement, a recognition that some truths, once revealed, cannot be undone. He understood now that the life he had known, the sense of security he had cultivated, would never be the same. And yet, beneath the shock, beneath the betrayal, a quiet determination began to stir, to protect his son, to safeguard the life he had built, and to navigate the coming storm with the clarity and precision he had always relied upon in business, now applied to the most intimate sphere of his life, family. In that small, sterile room, under the soft glow of the monitor, Michael Turner understood that the foundations of his life had been shaken irrevocably. And he also understood, with a clarity that cut sharper than any pain, that the choices he made in the days to come would define not just the fate of his marriage, but the character of the man he would become. Michael left the ultrasound room with a quiet, measured step, though inside, a storm of thoughts churned relentlessly. The sterile corridor, with its muted colors and faint antiseptic tang, felt suffocating. He barely registered the soft footsteps of nurses passing by, the distant murmur of a telephone, or the low hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Each sound seemed amplified, reverberating against the raw awareness that the life he had known was now irreversibly altered. Beth walked beside him, her posture rigid, fingers entwined in a futile attempt to steady herself. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Michael, please, we can talk about this, later." But the words held no sway. They were an attempt to anchor a drifting reality, to postpone a reckoning that was already inevitable. Michael's mind catalogued every nuance, every quiver in her voice, every flicker of fear in her eyes, and quietly assessed the depth of the betrayal that lay before him. He wanted to speak, to demand, to unleash the torrent of emotions swelling inside, but he remained silent. His training in years of business negotiations had instilled a discipline that now served a different purpose: control over the chaos of human emotion, over the impulses that threatened to consume him. He could see the path ahead, not with the clarity of forgiveness, but with the precision of a man mapping risks and consequences. Every action Beth had taken, every secret meeting, every carefully constructed deception, now lay bare in his mind. Dr. Harding had given him the facts, the proof in numbers and charts, yet the human implications, the fractures, the emotional turmoil, were far more devastating than any data could convey. Michael thought of Ethan, the boy whose innocent trust had been implicit in every decision, every embrace, every promise. Protecting him was no longer just a moral imperative, it had become the axis around which Michael's decisions would rotate. Michael slid a small stack of documents across the table. The edges of receipts, hotel invoices, and bank records peeked out from the folder, enough to convey seriousness without immediate disclosure. He observed Vale's reaction carefully, noting the subtle tightening of his jaw, the flash of unease in his eyes. "Take a look," Michael said quietly. "I believe transparency is the foundation of any partnership, or any interaction between adults." His tone was calm, measured, almost conversational, yet beneath it lay an unmistakable current of authority and warning. Vale picked up the folder, flipping through the contents with a casual demeanor that did little to mask his growing anxiety. Michael's eyes never left him, watching, recording, analyzing. Every glance, every shift in posture, every micro-expression contributed to the growing body of data that Michael was compiling for the next phase of his strategy. "You've done your homework," Vale said finally, his voice casual but tinged with subtle apprehension. "I see that." Michael nodded, allowing a slight smile, though it did not reach his eyes. "I have always believed in being fully informed," he replied. "It allows for rational decisions, informed choices, and predictable outcomes. It also prevents surprises, unpleasant surprises." Vale's smile faltered slightly, a flicker of understanding crossing his face. Michael noted it, catalogued it. The carefully constructed veneer of Vale's confidence was cracking, revealing the underlying vulnerability that Michael had anticipated. The moment of leverage was near, and he intended to use it deliberately. He leaned back slightly, maintaining eye contact, and allowed himself a slow exhale. The tension in the room was palpable, though neither man moved hastily. Michael's mind ran through every possible reaction Vale might have: denial, deflection, aggression, and he had prepared contingencies for each. This confrontation was not a gamble, it was a meticulously orchestrated maneuver, designed to secure truth, accountability, and protection for what was most important. Vale looked up from the documents, his expression a mixture of curiosity and unease. "Michael, I don't know what this is about exactly, but I can assure you everything is aboveboard. Michael's voice remained calm, even, measured. Andrew, you know as well as I do that there are discrepancies, inconsistencies, and actions that warrant clarification. My intent is not to accuse without evidence, my intent is to ensure transparency and accountability. He paused, letting the words settle. I have compiled everything necessary to confirm the truth. And the truth, Andrew, is rarely kind to those who assume it can be hidden indefinitely. Vale shifted in his seat, a subtle defensive gesture. Michael recognized the moment as pivotal, the juncture at which psychological pressure could yield clarity. He allowed the pause to stretch, unspoken consequences hanging in the air like a heavy fog. You're implying I've acted improperly, Vale said finally, trying to mask anxiety with a veneer of incredulity. I think there's a misunderstanding. Michael's expression remained calm, his tone steady and precise. Andrew, this is not a matter of misunderstanding. It is a matter of documented fact, corroborated evidence, and observed behavior. I suggest we address it openly and constructively, lest consequences extend beyond what you anticipate. Vale's eyes flickered toward the documents, then back to Michael, a subtle recognition dawning. The careful precision, the calculated calm, and the psychological pressure were having their intended effect. Michael could feel the moment of leverage solidifying, the pivot from uncertainty to acknowledgement becoming inevitable. In the quiet of the bistro, Michael Turner allowed a brief internal acknowledgement. The storm he had anticipated, planned for, and orchestrated was now in motion. Every step, every gesture, every word had been deliberately designed to bring clarity, accountability, and protection to the innocent. The confrontation had begun, and the path forward, though tense and fraught, was controlled, deliberate, and unavoidable. Vale exhaled slowly, the mask of confidence slipping just enough to reveal unease. All right, Michael. We need to talk, he said, his voice betraying a hint of apprehension. Michael nodded, allowing the briefest trace of satisfaction. Not from cruelty, but from the efficacy of strategy, the inevitability of consequence, and the protection of what truly mattered. The confrontation was only beginning, yet the tide had shifted. The storm of deception had met the calm, precise force of calculated truth, and the balance of power had begun to tilt. The following days unfolded with meticulous precision. Michael had created a framework that left nothing to chance. Every meeting, every phone call, every email was calibrated, each step aligned with a deliberate goal, to expose Andrew Vale's indiscretions, safeguard Ethan, protect the Turner family assets, and ensure accountability without compromising his own integrity. He began by coordinating with his legal counsel, an experienced team well-versed in corporate law and family matters. They reviewed financial documents, bank statements, and public records, cross-referencing everything Michael had compiled. Every anomaly, every potential violation was noted, catalogued, and prepared for potential legal scrutiny. Michael understood the necessity of airtight documentation. In a world where reputations and fortunes could hinge on technicalities, thorough preparation was paramount. Simultaneously, he engaged a trusted private investigator, Carl Whitman, a former law enforcement officer who specialized in corporate and personal investigations. Carl's role was discreet but thorough, gathering first-hand evidence of Vale's activities, meetings, transactions, communications. Every photograph, every observation, every subtle inconsistency added to the growing body of indisputable facts. Michael's plan relied not on rumor or conjecture, but on concrete, verifiable information that would withstand scrutiny in any forum, legal, professional, or personal. Each morning, Michael reviewed Carl's findings, cataloging them, integrating them into his overall strategy. He cross-referenced emails, receipts, and observations, ensuring that the narrative was complete, coherent, and irrefutable. Simultaneously, he monitored Ethan's routine, preserving stability and normalcy for his son. Michael knew that the child's well-being could not be collateral in this battle. Protection and preservation of innocence were as important as the retribution itself. Beth's involvement was cautiously managed. She provided clarifying documents and assisted in organizing personal financial records, under Michael's guidance. Though her actions could not undo the betrayal, she now became a participant in the corrective process, ensuring that all necessary information was available for accurate assessment and decisive action. Michael's tone with her remained firm yet measured, reflecting the dual need for accountability and cooperation. By midweek, the framework was complete. Michael had organized the evidence into comprehensive dossiers, each section meticulously labeled and cross-referenced. The documents included proof of Vale's unethical transactions, misrepresentations, and the inconsistencies that had been the result of both personal and professional deception. Michael had also prepared a detailed legal strategy, ensuring that any action taken would be fully supported by law, leaving no room for challenge or evasion. He arranged a formal meeting with Vale, this time with legal counsel present, a neutral, controlled environment where the facts could be presented clearly and unequivocally. Michael understood the importance of optics and protocol, public exposure, legal procedure, and strategic disclosure were all components of a carefully constructed plan. Nothing was left to chance. The meeting began with calm introductions, measured, polite exchanges. Michael spoke first, outlining the purpose of the gathering, framing it as an opportunity for transparency and accountability. Vale responded with practiced confidence, but subtle signs of unease betrayed his awareness of the impending consequences. As Michael presented the evidence, step by step, the room's tension thickened. Each document, each observation, each recorded inconsistency was placed on the table. Michael's voice remained calm, authoritative, and unyielding, articulating facts with precision and clarity. Vale's composure, once unshakable, began to crack under the weight of incontrovertible proof. "I suggest, Andrew," Michael said, his tone measured, "that we consider the implications of these findings carefully. The evidence is substantial, clear, and verifiable. Your actions have consequences, and the path forward requires acknowledgement, resolution, and corrective measures." Vale's expression shifted, a mixture of disbelief, apprehension, and the faintest flicker of respect. "Michael. This is a lot to process," he stammered. "I didn't think." Michael's gaze was steady, unwavering. "You may not have thought, but action and consequence are inseparable. The facts exist, and the response is required. What we do next will define not just legal and professional outcomes, but the personal boundaries that protect what is innocent, most importantly, Ethan." Vale's eyes flicked toward Michael, registering the unwavering seriousness. He had encountered business challenges before, negotiations fraught with tension, but nothing quite like this, personal, meticulous, strategic, and inexorably precise. Every move Michael had made up to this point had been deliberate, and every option for denial or evasion was already accounted for. Michael allowed a brief pause, giving Vale the opportunity to speak, to acknowledge, to react. Silence in the room was heavy, weighted with consequence. It was a silence calculated, deliberate, a psychological lever as effective as the legal evidence itself. "I understand," Vale said finally, voice low, reluctant, but acknowledging the gravity. I see that. What are you going to do?" Michael responded with calm authority. "We will proceed according to the law, with full documentation and accountability. Actions have consequences, and your responsibility will be clearly defined. I will protect what is innocent, ensure that ethical and legal standards are upheld, and allow corrective measures to be implemented. This is not about vengeance, it is about accountability, protection, and clarity." The meeting concluded with procedural precision. Every document was accounted for, every step noted, every decision strategically placed. Vale left, the veneer of confidence diminished, the consequences unmistakable. Michael returned home, his focus unwavering, knowing that the first phase of the plan had succeeded. The storm of deception had been met with calm, deliberate, and strategic action. In the quiet of the evening, Michael reflected on the unfolding events. The evidence had been presented, the confrontation executed, and the legal and strategic framework was fully operational. Ethan remained protected, the household secure, and the path forward, though tense, was controlled. Michael understood that the resolution of betrayal required not emotional impulsivity, but careful orchestration, deliberate strategy, and steadfast commitment to what was right and just. As night fell over the Turner residence, Michael Turner felt the satisfaction of meticulous execution, tempered by the solemn understanding of responsibility. The storm was not over, but the course had been set. The principles of clarity, protection, and accountability guided every subsequent step, ensuring that the consequences of betrayal would be both just and complete. Chapter 5: The Trap. The city seemed deceptively ordinary that morning, the crisp autumn air carrying a sense of calm that belied the tension beneath Michael Turner's meticulous planning. From his home office, he surveyed the streets below, noting the rhythm of life continuing unaltered, the dog walkers, the commuters, the distant hum of morning traffic. Yet within the confines of his carefully ordered world, every second was laden with consequence, every detail of observation a tool to be wielded in the unfolding confrontation. Michael had spent days assembling a comprehensive dossier on Andrew Vale, analyzing patterns, cross-referencing financial transactions, reviewing communications, and cataloging inconsistencies. Every detail of Vale's personal and professional life had been scrutinized: hotel visits, unexplained business dealings, and subtle misrepresentations. Michael's approach was deliberate and strategic. There would be no surprises, no room for Vale to evade accountability. He reviewed the plan once more, step by step. First, gather incontrovertible evidence. Second, coordinate legal counsel to ensure every move was compliant, protected, and decisive. Third, arrange the encounter, a seemingly routine business discussion designed to lure Vale into the controlled environment of Michael's choosing. Each step was precise, each action calculated, every potential reaction anticipated. By mid-morning, Michael was ready. He had arranged a meeting with Vale at a discreet location, an upscale office space rented for the purpose, neutral yet controlled. The setting was deliberate, public enough to prevent rash actions, private enough to maintain strategic advantage. Michael understood that psychological environment was as critical as legal strategy. Every element of this confrontation was designed to create leverage, clarity, and control. As Michael approached the office, he allowed himself a moment to reflect. The storm of betrayal had forced him into a realm of emotional complexity, yet he maintained focus on strategic objectives. His thoughts drifted briefly to Ethan, the boy's innocence guiding every decision. Protecting him was paramount, and all actions were filtered through that lens. No impulsive reactions, no emotional indulgence, only precision and foresight. Vale arrived shortly after, punctual as ever, exuding confidence that had long been carefully cultivated. Michael observed him closely, the stance, the handshake, the subtle flicker in his eyes that betrayed unacknowledged apprehension. Michael allowed a pause, noting the micro-expressions, cataloging every detail. The stage was set, and the caged anticipation hung in the room like a charged current. "Andrew," Michael said, his tone calm, measured, authoritative. "Thank you for meeting today. I believe it's in both our interests to review certain matters comprehensively, to ensure clarity and transparency." Vale's smile was confident but slightly forced. "Of course, Michael. Always open to a clear discussion." He had no way of knowing that every element of this meeting had been orchestrated to expose truth, ensure accountability, and secure justice. Michael gestured toward the folder he had placed on the table, containing a curated selection of meticulously documented evidence. "I've compiled records of transactions, communications, and activities that require clarification," he said, voice smooth, deliberate, yet carrying an unmistakable undercurrent of authority. "It's crucial that we address these matters directly and responsibly." Vale picked up the folder, flipping through it with casual efficiency, yet Michael detected the subtle tightening of his jaw, the fleeting hesitation in his eyes. The psychological trap was taking effect. Every micro-expression, every suppressed reaction, every flicker of uncertainty was observed and catalogued. Michael's strategy was not impulsive, it was deliberate, a carefully set trap that relied on Vale's own actions, his own oversights, to ensure accountability. Michael allowed silence to stretch, the room heavy with unspoken consequence. It was a silence designed to unsettle, a measured tool in psychological negotiation. Vale's posture shifted subtly, an unconscious acknowledgement of the inevitable. Michael's mind catalogued the moment, noting how anticipation and unease could be leveraged for clarity and confession. "I think it's evident, Andrew," Michael continued, calm and precise, "that certain discrepancies cannot be ignored. These matters extend beyond personal indiscretion, they impact professional responsibility, legal compliance, and ethical obligations." His voice was steady, unemotional, yet every word carried the weight of impending consequence. Vale's eyes flickered to the documents, scanning the evidence, then back to Michael. There was a brief flash of panic, restrained yet undeniable. "Michael, this is a lot," he said, his voice controlled but betraying tension. "I didn't think you would." Michael allowed the pause, letting the tension amplify. The trap was working exactly as intended. Vale's own confidence, his assumptions, his casual disregard for consequence, had now become the lever of accountability. Michael's plan depended on patient, deliberate orchestration. He had allowed Vale to walk into the environment on his own terms, only to find it structured for exposure and reckoning.